I first met Bobby Sands in 1976. I'd come into the Crumlin Road prison and then the hospital, and I was badly injured in an explosion. But I remember coming into the A-wing, and this fella with long, dirty blonde hair coming over to me and asked me who I was, where I was from, what I'd been charged with. He sat me down, and Joe McDonald was there as well, and he went and got me food and stuff. But I got a big impression of him when I first met him. He really was looking after all the the young fellas coming in and getting the place organised and doing this, that and the other, whatever. But that was my first encounter with Bobby, the very first time, and that would have been about December 1976. We were held in B-wing, the Crumlin Road, for a while, and then sent on then to the H blocks. Because of my age at the time, I was sent to H Block 3, and H Block 3 contained most of the political prisoners who were they were basically teenagers at that time. A lot of lads from Derry. So we were in H3, and the screws then, whatever new policy they had of implementing, they tried out on us first of all because of the youngest, and they thought that we were the most vulnerable and that we would break. But it was a couple of years later in 3 that Bobby had been in contact with him again, and he'd been sent up to their block along with Tom McElwee, Bick, and the Dark, and several other prisoners. And at that time, the prison authorities thought that they would also bring up the hardcore or the staff into H3 to break them as well. H3 was a terrible, terrible place at that time. So Bobby had come to our wing, and he brought with him a whole political agenda. He probably was the main organiser and politicising the prisoners. We were having sing-songs and stuff like that, but Bobby, he'd come in, taught us the politics. Tommy McKierney from Tyrone taught us the history of the movement, and they really revitalised our wing and our morale. Our morale was an all-time low prior to that, because we were getting beat useless with the screws. There was men leaving the blanket, etc. So this breath of fresh wind had come into our wing. During that time, I was lucky enough to share a cell with Bobby. Some people say I was unlucky to share a cell with him because I was covered in shrapnel. Therefore, the metal detectors were picking up metal from me all the time. So I had Bobby's radio to carry around inside me, and it was awful just carrying that around 24/7. And as well as that, you probably had maybe tobacco. A Parker pen refill was a luxury then if you can get one. So I had all this metalware belonged to Bobby as well. And so there was a nickname for anyone who shared a cell with him then, and it was the suitcase. So I was one of Bobby's suitcases, and Malky Curie, God rest him, he shared a cell with Bobby then once me and Bobby were split up. But it was during that time that he was most prolific in his writing, and he had a constant thirst for writing, and he was particularly intrigued by the fellas from the countryside or farming backgrounds, and he would have been picking at your brain to see what information he could extract, and then he would turn it into a poem, a song, or a story, or whatever. And I remember a few years ago, there was a young lady from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia had got in touch with me, and she was doing her doctorate, and she was studying her doctorate on the writings of Bobby Sands, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Someone from halfway across the world could pick a topic like that. And it was at that time, due to all the questions that I was bombarded with, that it started to really open up a lot of stuff that was in my mind that I thought was lost. And at night, I would go to bed with a notebook, and for every memory that was coming to me, I would get up in the middle of the night and write it down. But distinctly, I can see him walking up and down the cell, stroking his beard, and the dirty hair hanging around him, like the rest of us. And he would just be in deep thought. He would then run to the wall, take 2 steps to the wall, that was the much running we could do, and write another line of the song down. And this was going on all the time. And the sad thing is that most of his writings actually were lost. We got a wing move every 2 weeks, and the screws would come in with a pair of hoses to clean the cells. But they also then took great delight in removing whatever writing material we had written on the walls. We used just a lead of a pencil. And so Bobby's songs and stuff were all written on the walls and were all removed, destroyed. And I do remember one poem in particular that never made it outside. And Tommy McKierney from the Moy had given a talk on the famine. And the talk was no sooner over, Bobby had started writing. and he'd done a poem on it just called The Famine, and I think it was about 8 or 10 verses long. And I know he dedicated a verse to each of the provinces, Ulster, Munster, Leinster and Connaught, and it would have started off like, in Ulster the children wailed, etc, etc. And that never made it outside. The screws rubbed it off the wall. But that was just one of many. We sort of laughed at his poetry. You know, he'd got up out of the door, he'd got up to the door and read out some of the poems, and we were told him to catch yourself on, you know, a Wayne could write better or whatever. But little did we know at the time that the man he was an ordinary fella to us, but he was just a genius. And as a personal tribute, he wrote me the poem Roddy McCorley, and that was after I told him the story of Roddy McCorley as my father had told it to me, and he was intrigued by it. And then he started asking me the names of the places around Colm Scullion and different wee snippets of information so he could construct the poem. And he was at it for a couple of days. I wasn't allowed to look at it, though I do admit I had an odd peep at it. And on the evening that he had it completed, I remember he got to the door and he shouted across the wing for all the lads to get to the door, in particular Big Tom McElwee from Balahi. And he shouted at Big Tom, who is Egan Doris, up to the door. And he read the poem out to the whole lot of us. But that was one tribute he had done. And while I was relating the story to Bobby of the Roddy McCorley story, it incorporated a wee bit of country life as well. For example, myself and my father would have been poaching for salmon and eels in Loch Beg and River Ban. Bobby being Bobby, you know, his way of thanking you was including you in the poem. And one of the verses started off was, "'Twas at Cross Keys the pikes gleamed white beneath the telling yellow moon, as the common folk and there the poacher's son were out to meet their doom." And people wouldn't know that by reading it. The experts never wouldn't know that. But that was to Bobby's way of thanking you for the information you'd given him by including you in the poem. And he'd done that all the time. When Bobby went on hunger strike, I remember him giving his farewell speech to us. It was terrible. He'd get up to the door that night and we had a sing-song for him. And all the lads were singing. Most of us couldn't sing. We're singing, we're doing our own wee party pieces for him. And he got up that night and he gave a farewell speech to us. And he said at the time that he'll probably die and that others will follow him to the grave. There will be a lot of deaths. And I remember the response of most of the men was, "Catch yourself on, it's not going to go to that. You know, we're going to get our just demands." And I remember I often thought about Philip Rooney at that time, because Philip had to do the orderly for Bobby. The screws let him into the cell to see if he needed anything or whatever, you know. And you know, Philip would have been going in after eating his tea or his dinner or whatever, and there was our comrade Bobby lying dying. And there's things like that just don't go away. I remember also Bobby was a great fan of Ethna Carberry, and he wanted a book of Ethna Carberry's poems. And I think there was a lot of trouble getting it. It actually was got on the outside and it was sent in. And one of the governors said to Bobby, "Well, it's not too thick a book. If it's not too thick, you'll see the end of it." And I thought it was just a man on his deathbed, and here we had a so-called representative from the NIO, and that was how trivial he could get. And well, that was my memory then. And when Bobby was taken out of the wing after 21 days, I think it was, and I remember him shouting going to the end of the wing and shouting, "All the best, lads." And then the van come and took him up, drove him up the yard between the two wings, and all the men everywhere got up and roared and screamed and shouted and cheered and just hammered the doors up with empty piss pots. And it was just one of those times that you never would forget. The night Bobby died, I was still carrying the radio, and I had it inside me, and I used to take the radio out at night at about around 5 to midnight. We could gauge the time roughly by what time the screws were going off the air. So I would have got the Northern Ireland news around about midnight, and but that night in particular, Bick was 2 cells down from me, so I had the radio out and was passed it down till Bick swung it out the window, tied a towel, and we got it down till Bick. And I'll never ever to the day I die forget Bick coming up to the window and he shouted, "Richard Hughes Hagen Inyog Skull Hughes Hagen Inyog for Robert Bash couple of Nominahan." Bobby died a couple of months ago, and I think it was something like 15 or 16 or 17 minutes past 1 in the morning. Well, I wondered, did Bobby pass through the wing when he died that night? You know, we all felt as if he did, but it was just like getting hit with a train. The shock was, the unbelievable had happened. It was just so unreal. I suppose today when I think of the impact that all the hunger strikers have made on people throughout the world, and I particularly think back to the correspondence, the email I got from a young lady in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Hela, and her husband Adil, and to me it was just, you know, typical of the, I suppose, the legacy that he has left. That here's people throughout the world who are interested in, and more than interested in what they had done, standing up for their rights and how they achieved their rights against, I suppose, the most ruthless colonial power in the world. And when I think on it, when Thatcher is dead and gone, she'll be long forgotten. She will be forgotten, and yet Bobby and the other 9 lads, their spirit will go on for centuries. When Thatcher will only be a name somewhere in a book, and that's all will be heard of her. But personally speaking, I get young people would ask, you know, what was Bobby like, and most of them, okay, outside of the political role which we know him as, they would say, oh, you know, who was his favourite band? Did he like Led Zeppelin, or did he like Status Quo? And to me, I have an image in my own head of Bobby when I first met him, and he gave me the impression of, he looked like Donald Lunny of the Bothy band. He dressed the same, the 70s check shirt and the bell bottoms and the long hair and that, and he did give that image, or certainly to me, personally speaking, he looked like that. And singing, his voice was like a cross between Rod Stewart and Bonnie Tyler. He could throw his voice, it was raspy, but he was just so full of humour, and you know, he had the ability of taking a bad, negative situation and turn it into something funny and laugh at it. And people say it's an Irish thing, being able to laugh at your own misfortune, and Bobby's certainly a typical example of it. I remember on one occasion, a priest, Father so-and-so, had come to our cell, and this was during the height of the non-wash protest, and the place was filthy, and he had come in, and Bobby and myself were standing, and he said he had a terrible problem, and he wondered if we could help him with this problem. And we didn't know what was wrong. Maybe the man had just got bad news about a disease or something, but he announced that his problem was he didn't know if he should go to Greece this year on holidays or if he should go to Rome. I remember Bobby telling him just to go to hell. Just, that was it. But that was, you know, that was Bobby. It's funny too when I think of the legacy that Bobby has left. Okay, we all know Bobby and the 9 hunger strikers on the political legacy they've left in Ireland. But I remember on I suppose a more humorous side of it, I was in Chicago many years ago. I was working, and I met this guy from Jamaica. His name was Amos, and Amos had come to Chicago because he wanted to see what snow looked like before he died. And he told me he lived in a little house near Kingston, Jamaica, and it measured 12 foot by 8 foot. He lived, like, it was a bit bigger than our cell, but he really was living in another cell. But he asked where I was from, and I told him I'm Irish. He said, but whereabouts, young man, where in Ireland do you live? And I told him that I lived in Derry. And he then replied, I take note, you say Derry and not Londonderry. And I couldn't believe this. And he went on then to say, in Northern Ireland you have a great freedom fighter, and Bobby Sands a freedom fighter. And I was mesmerised. But I told Amos that I knew Bobby. Where he believed me or not, I don't know. But he told me that when Bobby and the other 9 lads were in hunger strike, that they and his family and friends protested outside the Governor General's residence in Kingston, Jamaica. And that was only one wee snippet that we're hearing about the protests around Belfast and Derry and South Armagh and Balahi and South Derry and everywhere, but we weren't hearing about the Amoses of this world, these small people who lived in cabins really. And there they were, you know, going out of their way to protest in Kingston, Jamaica for the rights of the hunger strikers. And he referred to Bobby, says, Bobby Sands, the great freedom fighter, fighting against, he fought against Elizabeth II, the great whore of Britain. And this is how he spoke. But to me, it was a part of the bigger picture that we didn't know about at the time. And these stories still continue. You know, people will tell you what they were doing at the time. It's like a benchmark. It was like when Kennedy was shot. People, they all know where they were at and what they were doing at the time when Bobby died, and the rest of the lads followed suit.